Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating, highly specific philosophical blueprint for human existence. It's a framework designed by Xu Feng, and it revolves around what he calls the standards of perfect human nature. Whether you're totally new to this philosophy or you already know its intricate rules, we're going to break down its underlying logic together. We'll look at how it calculates life mathematically, how it defines right and wrong, and even how it views the everyday act of just going to work. So let's jump right in. To really wrap our heads around this framework, we're going to step through 5 key pillars: perfect human nature, the formula of life, defining harm and crime, the 3 principles, and finally, the true value of work.
All right, Section 1, perfect human nature.
According to the text, having a perfect human nature isn't just some optional nice-to-have ideal. It's actually the absolute prerequisite if we want to escape this constant human cycle of war and competition. To get there, the framework lays out 8 foundational conditions. These range from having absolutely no mindset of competing and combating to being modest and revering nature. But for our analysis today, we're zeroing in exclusively on the mechanics of that very last one, the 8th condition: love life, love labor. What does that actually mean in practice?
That brings us to Section 2, the formula of life.
To truly understand what it means to love life, we first have to look at how the author mathematically defines life itself. And the text introduces this core equation: 1 + 1 = 1. Yeah, you heard that right. The author asserts that one specific element, added to a second entirely distinct element, equals a single, complete living organism. This equation actually breaks down into a really brilliant modern metaphor: hardware and software. The first one is the flesh. That's the physical carrier provided by our parents, and it functions just like a computer's hardware. The second one is the spiritual entity. This is given by the greatest creator, and it functions as the software. The text points out that hardware without software is literally just useless trash, right? And a spiritual entity without flesh, well, it can't move around in our 3-dimensional space. You absolutely need both elements combined to equal one life. Moving on to Section 3, defining harm and crime. Because of this incredibly strict hardware and software definition, the framework arrives at some highly polarizing conclusions about what actually constitutes a crime. In this system, every single life is entirely equal, period. Persecuting any life is seen as an act of contempt toward the parents who provided the hardware and fighting directly against the creator who provided the software. Therefore, any harm brought to life is considered a sin. And yes, that includes all wars, no matter how noble the tribal or religious justification might seem. And this really shows how the doctrine applies its rules completely neutrally, without bowing to modern political lines. Take the death penalty, for instance. It is strictly defined as a crime. The text argues that confining a heinous prisoner is enough, because fighting evil with evil is a sin. Abortion, on the other hand, is not considered a crime. Why? Well, based entirely on the author's timeline, the fetus is just maternal flesh. It's just hardware until the spiritual software actually downloads into the body roughly 10 days before birth. The text justifies its stance on early-stage fetuses with a very specific metaphor. It argues that before the spiritual entity arrives from another space, the biological matter is basically just an empty house. You can lay the foundation, you can build the walls, but only when the software actually moves in does it become a living essence. Only then does it become a home. Next up, Section 4, the 3 principles. Having firmly established what life is and what threatens its structure, the text pivots from defining boundaries to actionable principles. Principle 1 is to revere the creator. Principle 2 is to respect your parents. Notice how those first 2 directly correspond to showing gratitude to the providers of our spiritual software and our physical hardware. Makes sense, right? And finally, Principle 3 is to love work. But before we get to work, the framework offers a really specific warning about that second principle: respecting parents. While it's absolutely vital for showing gratitude, the text stresses that it is not the ultimate purpose of life. It explicitly warns against the societal tendency to spend all our time and energy chasing money, fame, or even spending fortunes worshiping distant gods, all while leaving aging parents lonely and helpless at home. It demands practical, hands-on care over distant worship. Which brings us to Section 5, the true value of work. This is perhaps the most grounded pillar of the entire framework: the strict classification of human labor. According to the blueprint, work is the absolute noblest human activity. It defines work as every activity that creates material wealth, so things that are visible and touchable, as well as spiritual wealth, like art, philosophy, and music, through the combination of mind and hands. Essentially, work is responsible for all human achievements and is 100% necessary for our survival and happiness. To ground this philosophy in reality, the text uses stark, everyday contrasts to separate true labor from what it considers parasitic activities. Simple acts like trimming a lawn, boiling a pot of cold water, sewing a dress, or writing a novel are all elevated to the noble status of work because they actively create something. Contrast that with stealing, traveling just for fun, mundane biological functions, or just inviting guests over. In this system, if it doesn't actively create material or spiritual wealth, it is not work.
And the text is uncompromising here. It argues that despising work or belittling its value is a philosophy of parasites. According to this blueprint, a society that doesn't respect the simple, dignified act of boiling water or planting a tree will inevitably become lazy, corrupt, and completely distorted. Basically, a society that doesn't value labor is bound to ruin life itself.
As the text concludes its vast conceptual architecture, it pulls back to the ultimate prize, life itself. It reminds the reader that everything else, career, freedom, prosperity, glory, all of that can be given a price tag. But life is priceless. And despite being incredibly tenacious, life is frail and delicate, requiring constant, everyday care through the very labor we were just talking about. The author leaves us with this beautiful imagery, completely shifting away from the rigid hardware-software equations and the strict rules of labor. Instead, we get a poetic vision. The goal isn't necessarily to bloom gorgeous flowers, but simply to keep flowing, like a stream running safely from its source to the sea without drying up midway. After exploring this meticulous and uncompromising framework, from the 1+1 formula of existence all the way to the everyday nobility of boiling water, we're left to reflect on our own reality. How do these structural definitions align with your daily routine? In a world categorized by physical hardware and spiritual software, how do you define the true essence of your own life and the value of your own labor? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.